Melissa. So aloha and welcome to Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month. HISAM is an annual event dedicated to educating and mobilizing the residents of Hawaii to protect our islands from threats imposed by invasive species. This year's theme explores what's at risk. So we often find ourselves immersed in learning about the next invasive species threat. But this year we wanted to shift the focus onto the beloved native species, their ecosystem functions and cultural practices that are being threatened due to invasive species. So awareness and compassion is critical for invasive species work. And without those things, it is impossible to get people to care, to observe, and to make the changes we need. So this afternoon, we will hear from two plant people who will share their passions and relationships with native plants. We'll have an opportunity for a discussion at the end of the presentation. So please remember to send over any questions you may have via the Q&A or chat. And with that, I will get into our first speaker. All right. So if you want to put sharing, and then Avalon, feel free to put up your slides. So Avalon Paradea is a student of kapa and Waihoʻoluʻu mea kanu, or plant dyes, under her kumu Rowan Hufford since 2017. They currently reside in Waikoloa, and they're known for their ʻāina-based arts that focus on themes like human or more than human pilina, queer identity, ancestral connections, demilitarization, personal and community healing, as well as the reigniting of kanaka-ʻōiwi and other indigenous knowledge systems. I just wanted to mention that I met Avalon last year at Hala Fest, where she was selling some of her awesome stickers and all of her other cool merch. And also, again, at the Women in STEM conference, where I got to attend one of her native plant dye workshops and learned so much about the magic of plant dyes and got to experience the magic myself and how they change colors and the different things you could do with acidity. So, I mean, it's pretty incredible, the skills that she has. So I'm excited to have you talk today, Avalon. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
Aloha, Darcy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're clear.
Okay. I'm only asking because I have a fan on me, and to me it's kind of loud, but I'm not sure if anybody else can hear it, so good. Yeah, aloha kako. It's so nice to see everybody here. I'm going to be kind of repurposing a set of slides that I did recently for Palama Nui, so that was focusing on kapa and dryland forest plants in particular, although we use a lot of different types of plants in kapa. But thank you so much for that great introduction to me, Darcy. So yes, I am a queer ʻāina-based artist located in Waikoloa, which is where I grew up. So here's just some photos of some of my work here, me working on some kapa, a little sort of swatch of colors here. So these are a few different, mostly native plant dyes. And then I also work with earth pigments as well. So this is some of our red soil. This is not technically alaia, although some people might refer to it as such, but it is red soil from Kohala. And I love making paint with our natural soils here. Let me see on the next slide. I'm using PDF for this, so it's a little different. So a little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's in anthropology and minor in ethnobotany that I got at UH Manoa in 2014. And then more recently, in the past 2 years, I graduated with my master's in the tropical environmental conservation and biology program at UH Hilo. And so just a photo of me hanging out with the hala pepe plant that I love up in Waimea, some ukiuki berries. I love the beautiful blue dye that you can get from this native plant. And then I love wildlife in a broad sense here in Hawaii. ʻāina is very dear and precious to me, as I'm sure it is to all of us here. So that's one of our native ʻokaʻi, the blackbird sphinx moth caterpillars. So to kind of start off, what is kapa? Many of us here might know what kapa is, but for anybody who doesn't know or maybe is less familiar with it, I like to refer to kapa as being the fabric of Hawaii. So prior to European and American colonization, kapa, it was the primary fabric here in Hawaii and frankly throughout most of the Pacific. Kapa is made using the inner fibers of a tree that's called bauke here in Hawaii. It's got other names in other parts of the world. The English name for it is paper mulberry. Not the same thing as mulberry. I've had a lot of people coming up to me saying, oh yeah, you can use mulberry for this. It's not the same plant. They are related. But paper mulberry is a specific plant. And that is a Polynesian introduced plant that was brought to Hawaii specifically for the purpose of making kapa. And so kapa was used for making clothing, bedding, funeral shrouds, baby's first blanket, basically anything you can kind of imagine as fabric in Hawaii. would have been kapa with a few exceptions. So kapa was not usually used for like matting. That would have been hala or makaloa or other, plated and woven materials that are more waterproof. Kapa can be made water resistant, but not truly waterproof. And it is not used for the sails on va'a. I've had a lot of people ask me about that. No, that is not, that would have fallen apart. But that said, kapa is a very strong, durable material. And so here's a few images of some very important kapa practitioners. So at the top, we have Puanani Van Dorp. So she, and then the woman in the middle is Marie McDonald. The woman at the bottom is Malia Solomon. These three women, amongst other folks during the Hawaiian Renaissance of the 60s and 70s, helped to revive kapa because kapa was a practice that essentially went dormant. Some people say it went extinct, and I really like what my one friend, Kaiulani de Silva says. Kaiulani says that it did not go extinct. That suggested something has gone forever. It was dormant and just laying in wait. And so what these women and other practitioners did in the 60s and 70s is they did a lot of research to try to revive this practice. And today we have growing numbers of kapa practitioners throughout Hawaii and other parts of the world as well. I mean, I actually have friends who are doing kapa as far as Aotearoa, Seattle, so we're far flung and widespread, but we're a small enough community that we are all, somewhat in touch with each other. So a little bit more about the process here. So as mentioned, it's the inner fibers of the tree that are used, and it's a bit of a misnomer. People refer to kapa as bark cloth. It's not the bark of the tree, it's the inner part of the tree, or the inner bark, which is the phloem of the plant. It's the bast of the plant. The Hawaiian word for that is kai, K-A-E. So what we do is we harvest the trees when they are about a quarter or wider in diameter, which is about a year of growth, nine months to a year of growth. And we're growing them so they're perfectly straight and linear, so that way there's no pukas in that material. We're cutting them at the base, we're cutting off the tops of them, so you've got a long stick, usually anywhere from 4 feet to 12 feet if you get them nice and tall. And then you're stripping the outer and the inner bark off together, and then you're separating that outer bark from that inner bark. And so you can kind of see in this middle upper photo here, kind of rolling that up into a little bundle. That's the inner fibers when they're just freshly stripped off the tree. And what we do from there is we do this process called retting. So we're taking those fibers and we're putting them in salt water for a few days, and then in fresh water for a few days in a bucket. And what that process of retting is it's kind of sort of like fermentation in the sense that it's a lot of little microbes breaking down those fibers and making them softer and more pliable and easier to beat. And that particular process is particularly unique here in Hawaii in terms of how bark cloth is made. And so after that process is done, we take those little bundles out of our buckets, and then we beat them first on a pohaku, so on a rock, which you can see in the upper right photo here, with a rounded beater, which is called a hohoa. And so those are wooden beaters. And then we transition from that stage to beating them on a wooden anvil with a 4-sided wooden beater, which are called kuku. And so that process is basically a felting process. So that initial beating on the pohaku, we're kind of widening those fibers. We're spreading out the bast. You can start with something that's only maybe 2 or 3 inches wide. And by the end, you might have something that's like 8 inches. And then what we're doing is we're layering them on top of each other. So you're taking 2 or more of those initially beaten bast and you're felting them into each other. So that's a felting process where the fibers are biting into each other and they're becoming one finished product. And from there, once you have your finished kapa, you can dry it out. And then it's pretty standard for folks to decorate them. And so often that's done with plant dyes, as well as earth pigments like alaya or natural materials like charcoal or soot. So you have a finished, beautiful product. And this final picture here is not one of my kapa. That is my kumu Rowan Hufford's kapa, because hers are so much prettier than mine. So I included that in my slide. I'm not that talented. So really important aspects of making kapa are hardwood tools and plant-based dyes. And so this kind of gets into the meat of why we love our native lāʻau so much, because they are such a vital aspect of kapa making and have been since time immemorial. So this is a little bit about dryland forests. We're going to go ahead and skip that a little bit. But, here's a few important plants when it comes to making kapa. So ohia is, of course, I think we all know who ohia is in our own respective ways. Metrosideros polymorpha, so endemic, a threatened plant at this point in time. This is a very important canopy tree. The wood is used for making hohoa and iʻikuku. So several of my tools are ohia wood, and I'm very fortunate to have that, especially because as of right now, of course, people are not supposed to be cutting down or working with ohia wood in any capacity because of rod. And so I have these tools that were made prior to rapid ohia death at least being known in 2016. And so this is where we really need to be protecting these native species for so many reasons, ecological as well as cultural. So this is just an image here of my beloved hohoa that is my very first tool that I got many years ago from my friend Puakea, who's a very talented woodworker and kapa maker. And it's such an incredible tool. I mean, seriously, like there's nothing like ohia wood. It's really unique and very, very durable. Iliahi is also a really important plant in terms of making kapa, but not for the reasons folks might realize. What it is it was used for scenting kapa. And so again, a plant that you're probably not going to just be going out and cutting down at this point in time for good reasons. You know, Iliahi numbers were decimated during the sandalwood trade at the turn of and the beginning parts of the 19th century. But yeah, the powdered wood and possibly also the flowers can be used to scent kapa. And so I have some friends that are woodworkers, and I've been able to scent some of my kapa with like the shavings, the little bits of shavings and stuff that they get when they've worked with iliahi wood that they, you know, found naturally fallen that they've been allowed to take from people's properties and stuff like that. And for folks who haven't ever smelled the pua on sandalwood, on iliahi, I highly recommend it. They are incredible. It depends on the variety and it depends on where they're growing, but in some places, most places here on this island, at least on Oahu, I haven't noticed it quite as strongly, but they have like a very honey smell. And so like this is a photograph I got of one of our koa butterflies feeding on the flowers of an iliahi that was flowering up. I think this was at Pu'uhuluhulu, so right in the middle of the island. Yeah. So they really love those flowers. Kauaʻa is a plant that I was actually just talking about quite a bit today since I was up in Waimea. And this is, at least according to written records, probably one of the most important plants in terms of a hardwood species for kapa tool making. There's a book that was written back in 1911 by William T. Brigham, who's a really horrible person, but he put together a book called Kahana Kapa, and it is still a good resource, although you have to read it with a heavy dose of salt. His analyses suggested that most of the tools at Bishop Museum were kauaʻa trees. So these are you know, some people say it's like smaller koa. It's a separate species entirely, Acacia koia. But yes, it kind of looks like koa. They're both in the same genus, Acacia. And the wood is very, very durable. And I'm very fortunate to also have some tools of koia wood. Haven't tested them yet since my friend literally just made me the tools like 2 or 3 months ago. But I'm excited to give those a try at some point. So yeah, so that's another really important plant in terms of tool making. Uhi uhi is a plant that I probably will never have tools for. Anybody who's familiar with this plant, this is a critically endangered species. So there are fewer than 50 remaining wild individuals of uhi uhi at this point in time, primarily found in our dryland forest ecosystems. This is very, very dense, very heavy wood, just incredible. I'm very fortunate to be able to use tools occasionally that belong to my kumu, pictured here in the center of this image. Both of those are uhi uhi, and so it is, you know, having a heavier wood is important for kapa making because you're not having to use your wrist and hand as much, and the tool's doing the work. You know, kind of similar to like if you're making poi, you want that poakukuiai to do the work as opposed to you having to smash your hand the whole time, you know. But yeah, another very important plant for kapa making historically and still in the modern day for those few folks that have tools made of this wood. I'm going to go ahead and skip Koila and skip over to Ma'o. So this is a favorite of mine's. I always say I don't pick favorites, but Ma'o and Uki Uki are pretty tied as far as favorite plant dyes go. So this is one of our endemic species. This is our endemic cotton. Really incredible plant. So the pua, the flowers, give this incredible, you know, dark green color. It's like this kind of deeper, like sagey, foresty green, and you can see a little swatch of that right in the middle of this slide. What's interesting is that in the literature, it says that the leaves give a green color. I'm not so sure about this, and this is where other kapa makers and I do a lot of experimentation. We go back and look at historic literature and try to see what does and doesn't work, you know, because sometimes things might be written down wrong by transcribers or people who were not kapa make. Most literature out there that's historic about kapa was written by people who did not make kapa themselves. And so, you know, it's still important records, but it's important to do a lot of experimentation to better understand how things might have been made in the past and how we can continue making kapa into the future. So we have found that the flowers yield a really beautiful green color. The leaves don't. So, which is interesting because the flowers are these beautiful little yellow things, and you'd never guess that you'd get this nice dark green color from them. Let's see here. And also I'm growing a whole bunch of these little guys right now. They are actually very, very easy to grow in my personal experience. And because I'm in a dry area, which they love, I'm going to be putting these out in my backyard and hopefully having like choke, just giving flowers, especially because most of my friends don't live in a dry land area, so they can't grow these. And I'm excited to grow them for my kumu and for other people who don't have access to these plants. Love ma'o. And then there's ma'o hauhele, which is Hibiscus brackenridgei. This is also a highly endangered plant. This is our, you know, quote unquote state flower. And so anybody who's driven through like Waimea, you'll see these. Although they are endangered in the wild, they're really common landscaping plants at this point in time. You can see them growing at the nature park up in Waimea and a whole bunch of other places. And these beautiful flowers give also a really beautiful bluish or greenish color. And you can see that color in the middle of this kapa piece that I made. So it's not the blue at the bottom, it's not the yellow at the top, it's that green right in the middle. Let's see. I'm going to skip kolea and alehe'e. Ali'i is a really cool one too. And so when these are flowering during the summerish time, I'm sorry, fruiting, it's the fruits that we use for this. You can harvest these fruits when they are still that dark red color, which I feel kind of bad about just because they haven't gone to seed just yet. They have to turn brown and leathery and kind of open and dehisce for those seeds to be ready. So harvesting this for dye means that you're actually not getting seeds to save for the future, which is not ideal, but I only harvest in very, very tiny batches from only a few specific plants, and I'm growing my own at this point in time. And these yield a really neat, like reddish brown color as well. So yeah, in terms of working with native species, loss of species diversity has a huge impact on culture in Hawaii and across the world. You know, because so many of these species at this point in time are endangered or threatened, I always tell people, you know, grow it to know it. It's better to be growing things and working with them than just going out and harvesting in the wild, although it is also important to build those relationships with, you know, so-called wild spaces. Just knowing where you're harvesting, only taking what you need is really, really important so that we can continue growing these plants into the future. And adaptation is key. You know, this is where, although I do have some tools that are koi'a and ohia, at this point, most kapa makers are making their tools with non-native woods. So one of these beaters, the one in the center, that's this really beautiful dark color, that's kiave. I also have a beater that's made with silk oak. My kua, my anvil that I use, that's mango wood. So, you know, this is where in a time where there is so much non-native plants growing in Hawaii, and especially invasive plants, it's about adapting to those changes, like still building those relationships with the native species, learning about them, reading about them, getting to know them as living plants. If we're not able to use them, you know, for these cultural pursuits, then working with other plants instead. And I think that that's equally important. It is important to be working with the environment that we exist in today. Yeah, so that's honestly kind of it, you know, like I could go on, and I'm just gonna go ahead and cut myself off here. But yeah, I'd love to hear anybody's questions, and I love kapa. And if anybody ever wants to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I can drop my contact info, or maybe Darcy can drop my contact info in the chat.
Great. Mahalo nui, Avalon. I mean, I think that was awesome. Like whenever I think of kapa, I just think of Vauke. But I mean, I'm glad you brought in all the other meokanu that it takes to do kapa beyond just what you're pounding out, but all the lovely hardwoods that go into making all those tools. I mean, that's beautiful. I really love that. I know you mentioned you guys experimented with other woods for the tools. Have you guys ever experimented with other, is there any other plants plants to use to make kapa, like that are non-native?
That's a really good question. No, that is probably one of the hard ones because there are other plants that we can use for making kapa. So in the literature, you can use mamaki and you can also use ulu. Mamaki is a little more tricky because again, it's like unless you're growing a tree and you're going to cut the whole thing down, you don't really want to be going out in the wild and cutting down a mamaki tree. And then ulu, though, you can use the saplings as they're growing nice and straight. And I know plenty of people who do that. In fact, ulu is what's primarily used for bark cloth in other parts of the Pacific, not most of the Pacific, but in some other parts of the Pacific. So both ulu and vauke are in the Moraceae family, so the fig family. I think that, exactly, it kind of just says a lot right there in terms of like the strength of these fibers and their ability to be soaked and beaten in this capacity. But no non-native plants for kapa making as of yet. The good thing is at least vauke is something that is not an endangered plant by any measure. So the vauke itself is not the problem. It's harder with the dyes. I think making dyes with invasive plants, that's a big thing on my agenda this year, is to be getting to know our invasives, like specifically the invasives, not just the non-natives, the invasives, and making dyes with those because we have some great dye plants like gorse that are all over the place. Yeah, it's traditionally used for dye in the UK. Go figure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool to know. Very cool. Mahalo for sharing that. Okay, and I will save the rest of the questions for afterwards, and we will get into Kekai's talk next. So I'll let you throw your slides up, Kekai, and I'll do a little intro. All right. So Kekai Naone is a Native Hawaiian artist and cultural practitioner dedicated to preserving and sharing stories of the land and ancestors through lauhala weaving. Rooted in Hawaiian traditions, their work emphasizes the deep connection between people and place, using the art of weaving to honor history and inspire stewardship. Each creation serves as a reminder that the well-being of the natural world is inseparable from our collective prosperity. And through the interlacing of hala leaves, they strive to foster meaningful relationships between people and their environment, ensuring that these ancestral practices continue to thrive for future generations. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Kekai.
Thank you so much. Aloha mai kako. Yeah, let's just get into it. I'm not really good at the whole introduction thing, and I've already been introduced. So I'm talking about hala today, and hala is a passion plant of mine and one of the many things that I do. And like Avalon, I'm reusing slides that I have from one of my high school classes. So not everything is gonna make sense, and we're gonna gloss over those parts. But I always start with just these pictures of hala because you might hear the name and not be able to place where you've seen it before. But everyone has definitely seen this tree once in their life. And if you haven't, you probably don't go outside. I promise you, you've seen it when you're driving, you've seen it in landscaping, you've seen it somewhere. So hala, the scientific name is Pandanus tinctorius. It is called screw pine in English, amongst many other names. It's indigenous and it lives in the Kahakai and Vaunahele region. So it grows right on the ocean and it can grow pretty high up in altitude as well. A little interesting thing about the name hala. Hala means to pass as time or also death. A lot of people call it a lauhala tree, and that's wrong. And I don't like to tell people they're wrong, but technically it's wrong. Lauhala is the name of the leaf. Hala is the name of the tree. And that's just something that I hear it and my eye twitches a little bit. This is a whole long story about hala, and I'm just going to tell it to you. I don't want you guys to look at the words, but long ago, in my storytelling way, there was a tree called Ohi Ohi Kupua, and it sprouted from the middle of the ocean. And the story goes that as Pele was traveling from Kahiki to Hawaii, her canoe got stuck in the tree. And then at this point, some of the variations of the story all kind of branch off in different areas. But she calls upon her brother, who pours salt water on top of the baby leaves, and they start to wilt and die. And at that point, she starts taking all the leaves and throwing them everywhere. And that is how hala comes to Hawaii. And the first place that those leaves landed and grew were in Kohala. So Kohala is supposedly the very first place that hala grew in Hawaii. And then there was a chiefess, and her name was Lauhuki. And Lauhuki literally means to pull leaves. And it was at her direction that she taught women how to weave the leaves into mats and other things. So that's the little story about hala. I love its connection to Pele, and that she's kind of the one that's credited with bringing hala to Hawaii, non-intentionally, I suppose. It happened out of a very emotional moment, but still she did it. And since I'm calling in from Puna, I just wanted to share this olelo noʻeau Puna paia ala I ka hala. The lei of the hala fruit, the ahui hala, was after they were done being worn, they would be hung up in the house as a way to bring fragrance to it. But another idea of the meaning of this olelo noʻeau is that because the ulu hala, or the groves of hala in Puna, were so vast and verdant that it was as if they were walls of scent, that you were completely surrounded in a room of the smell of all of the fruit. And I feel like sometimes if you've smelt the fruit, maybe when it's a little past its age, when it's on the ground, it kind of smells a little bit funky sometimes, because they're rotten. So I would encourage everyone to pick some fresh ones and go smell those ones instead. They come in a variety of colors, usually yellow. You can see this one is yellow on top, orange on the base, and all the way to red, which is our special hala ula. Now, we don't only have the ohui hala, which is on the female trees, but we also have the hinano, which is another favorite of mine. And the hinano is present on the male trees. The hinano grows, I don't know. I know it's hinano season when I see them. And I think it's about summertime, and then I think it's about winterish time. And that's really kind of the only way you can tell the difference between the two trees, if it's a boy tree or a girl tree. Interestingly, I have a friend who's a weaver in Guam, and they only use male leaves in their weaving. They like those. But I've noticed that usually the male trees, their leaves are shorter, and personally, not as great as the female leaves. And it's not something that I've done extensive research on. It just happened to notice, oh, that I did pick these from a tree that was male. Kind of junk. And usually I'm picking from female trees because those I feel like are more predominant in the landscape of where I go to harvest. They're mostly female, so that's kind of what I'm accustomed to. The female leaves also tend to be a lot longer. And so hala is really cool because I feel like it kind of is so different from other plants where the older the tree gets, the bigger it is usually. But with hala, the older it gets, it starts to kind of shrink. And so it'll get taller, but the leaves will get shorter. And the different bracts where it's branching off all kind of seem to be more separated. So when you see a tree that has really big leaves, and I have a baby tree that I've been taking care of, 8-foot leaves, huge, amazing. And then you go places like Keaukaha, like towards Waiuli, and you see those really tall trees, and the leaves are maybe like your arm long. Those ones are really old. And so I find it kind of very interesting and fascinating that it's kind of different than other plants like that. It gets a little bit smaller. But the hinano is such a special plant, such a special flower, and for the royalty and the ali'i, mats would actually be woven out of hinano. And if you have the opportunity to feel it, it is such a soft leaf. It's so soft and it has such a sweet smell to it. And there are stories that hinano would be used in like, how do you say, not witchcraft, but it was used by like girls when they had a crush on somebody. They would go shake the hinano on them so they would fall in love with them. And you get the pollen all over you. And it is a very dense with pollen. Those are very tricky. But the hinano leaves are only maybe from your wrist to your elbow, the really good ones. They're very tiny, a foot long. And so imagining making an entire mat, right? The amount of hinano that you would need really shows the dedication and love that a community would have for their ali'i, to gift them something of that value. And really, the hinano is superior to regular hala. It's just so soft and supple. But I've been collecting hinano for several years now, and every now and again, my dream is to make a hat out of hinano or something, anything really. Every now and again, I'll get a box in the mail from my mom, and she just sends me hinano leaves because she knows it's something I'm working on. But they dry a really dark brown chocolate color. But they can also dry like bright white. And so hala is really cool because we get such a range of color. Like if you live Kona side, they have the prized white, perfectly bleached Lāʻau. And then if you're from Kona side, then you look at Hilo and we have the dark, beautiful chocolate, almost red colored leaves. And it's so funny because everyone always wants the hala not where they're from. I always have people on Oahu or other islands, can you send me some Hilo Lāʻau? Because Hilo is known for its chocolate, beautiful, dark leaves. And I'm always like, send me some Kona Lāʻau, because you get the whites and you get the golden and the yellow. And just with its natural range of color, being able to sort and bring them together to kind of have more contrast or create design is such a beautiful thing. So the hinano again in yellow, and then there's a beautiful red that we have. I remember hearing legends and stories that if you wanted a female tree, you have a woman plant the seeds, and if you want a male tree, then you have a man do it. And those hala ones are just very, the ula, the red ones are, a couple extra precautions have to be taken with the hopes of achieving a red tree. And so the parts of the hala, so the tree is called the puhala, the lau hala is the leaf, and the ule hala are these aerial roots that we see. And it's just so fascinating because every single part of this tree can be used for something. So the male trees are very fibrous, and when they would be cut down, they would actually like poke holes in the trunk and put plants in them, kind of like a natural garden box kind of vibe. And then the female trees, they actually create a wood that could be used to make small bowls or objects. It wasn't a very strong wood, but a wood could be made from it. We know the uses of hala. The ule hala, the roots are a really amazing material for cordage. They're really great, really strong. The tip of it was used medicinally. And of course, then we know about the hinano and the ahui hala. The fruits, in other parts of the world, they eat those fruits, you know. And in Hawaii, it was considered a famine food. So if there's nothing to eat, you could eat hala fruit. And I guess in the base part of it, there's a little nut in each seed that's supposed to taste like macadamia nut. Never tried it. Don't know if I will. And these are just some of the words associated with hala. And, you know, for me, bringing in the cultural, if there's no cultural context, but especially if there's no Olelo Hawaii context to the practices that we are carrying on, like we're missing the entire picture, essentially. Because if you look at all these words, especially from number 7 to 12, they're all words for different stages of the leaves, right? And so that gives us a little glimpse into the Hawaiian worldview perspective of, you know, just being able to track all the various stages of leaf and knowing how and when to use each one. So if we look at number 8, pukani is the fine white leaves in the center cluster. And those leaves would be cut, dried, harvested, and used in a way that's very similar to the hinano. And then if we look at like the pa'ilaula, those are like the really good leaves, right? They're dried, they're nice, but they haven't been sitting, right? And so the thing about hala is, in order to start weaving, you really got to take care of your tree because the leaves last for a long time. And so you don't know how long that leaf has been sitting on the ground. And so clearing a tree and then being able to kind of reset it in a way is such an awesome thing to take care of the tree, but also for weavers to be able to then consistently harvest and know that we're getting quality. One of the best things that I've learned in my, I don't know, 15 years of weaving is to be picky. Because if you choose junk Lāʻau, you're going to have a junk time weaving. And if you're really picky about the quality of your leaves, it might take a lot of extra work and a lot longer to harvest. The weaving is going to be a breeze, right? But if you're just fast, just pick whatever, the weaving during that portion, you'll slow down because all your leaves are breaking and you got to replace them and do all these other things. So really be picky with your leaves. I'll pick 100, and out of that 100, I'll take home 10. Because I really inspect every single one top to bottom. And so making, weaving really is a labor of love. And I really do think the only people that weave are the people that really enjoy it. Like no one's doing it just as something to do. It's something you do if you really enjoy and love it. My kumu is Michelle Faridi Zane. She is the owner of Hana Hilo. Sometimes I have stuff in store, but not really because I don't do like that. It's I make something and then I just want to keep it. And then I usually end up giving it away because I just find so much joy in other people having all those things. And so my partner always tells me like, you gotta make nice, I always keep the rejects. So unfortunately, even though I am a weaver, my house is filled with kind of like junk. Not the prettiest things. I always keep oh yeah, I'll use that one for gardening. Oh, the dogs can sleep on that mat. It's not that nice. Because all the nice things, I just love to give it to people. And there's been occasion, I was on Kauai visiting my mom once, and this TSA auntie at the airport, I was wearing my hat and she was like, I love it so much. I've always wanted one. It's so beautiful. And so off my head, it went right to her. Because I really love seeing the joy in other people being able to have and appreciate those things. My idea is I can always make another hat. It's fine. I can make another one. They might not have the opportunity to have a hat. So just take it. It's whatever. It's fine. This is a little bottle that I made. I was doing a whole series of like objects with hats. And so I was making, I had this, I don't know, like a finger cactus kind of thing. And I made like 10 hats for my cactus just to have, gave it a real cowboy vibe on the lanai. And then I started making like miniature hats for bottles and for just all kind of my salt holder, all kinds of stuff. I think that's a really good fun activity when you weave is that you make something and then you say, how tiny can I make it now? How much smaller can I make it? And we kind of go back and forth with other weavers like, oh, I made mine's even tinier than yours. So I want to get into a couple of pictures. So this is at Mokuola, Coconut Island in Hilo. If you know where that is, you probably might not even believe that this is Mokuola. But in that grassy field in the middle, it used to be a pond. And I had the opportunity to go with one of the last people who lived on Mokuola. Her family had a home on the island. And she mentioned the pond in the middle and how, the waves used to wash over the island and there were hala trees everywhere. And that's why if you go to Mokuola at high tide, usually like on the king tides, that center grassy field gets wet because there's a pond there. But Mokuola was very popular for its hala trees. And then some of the other pictures we may have seen before, people, families weaving. Even the children are involved. So for weavers, it was a family affair. Although we know that women were the predominant weavers. I just saw a picture Hawaii State Archives posted the other day of a man weaving. And it's one of the few, maybe only pictures I've seen of a man weaving in this time period. But you know, I've heard stories of like our kupuna weaving, and it was family kuleana for them, right? You want to go outside and play, you clean 100 leaves, and then you can go play, because it was their livelihood. On a census in past time from Kona, entire families from 50-year-old grandma to 6-year-old keiki, their occupation would be listed as weaver, because everyone in the family was involved in the process. And then we have this one. A lot of these are probably staged photos, as they often were, but we get to see a little bit of insight into how mats were woven in this photo, right? So we see she's working on a mat, but she's currently sitting on the mat that she is weaving. And then she appears to have the start of a hat to the left side of her. And so a fun activity I do in class is how to read a photograph, where I just ask them, what do you see? And then we spend some time diving into it, and then the answers get deeper and deeper. But when we look at these old photos, there's a lot of little things that we can pick up about how things were woven. This mat, for example, there's another image of a woman. She was from Puna, and she was weaving a small mat, but she inscribed her name on it. And we always wondered, you know, did that come after put the colored leaves in, or during? And it came during, because in the photo you can see that it's being woven and the letters are being created as she's weaving by adding in an overlay of another plant or a darker leaf in order to create the letters. And then these are some of the things that I have made. The stool on the left was the very first stool that I ever made. It took me, I don't know how long. I weave when I have the time. And if my ADHD is like really working, I can finish it in a weekend. And if not, it'll take me a year. The hat in the middle I made in about, I don't know, 10 hours. It's really fast. But it just depends if the brain is working. Unfortunately, that stool, well, fortunately and unfortunately, that stool lives with one of my friends, Meredith Buck, who's a weaver in Kona. And I say unfortunately because I wish I had a stool. I've made 3 and I have none to show for it. So if you want to go see my stuff, you got to go find one of my friends where they have all my nice things. This papale in the center, so these 3 colored strips that you see, the 2 white and the dark, those are actually hinano. So we have the 2 white are hinano that were maintained in a certain way, bleached in the sun to keep white, and those brown ones are also hinano that I did some magic on to make sure they dried super dark chocolate brown. So both the same leaf, but manipulated in a way where we can get different colors out of them. And then I'm sure the Lāʻau in all of these photos are from Hilo or Puna. It's where I usually go. Going back to the stool, the black leaves are actually somo, so they are from Fiji, and they're dyed in mud, and that's how they come to be really black. And then we have this mat on the far right. I made it for my dog because as I was working on things, she always wanted to lay in the hala or scratch her face because she has allergies, scratch her face on the hats or the things I was working on. So I made her a mat. So I was like, you stay away from my stuff. You have your own thing to go scratch and rub on. And then I inscribed Niolopua on it just for funsies. Niolopua is the Hawaiian god of sleep and dreaming. So I was like, okay, you can go sleep on your mat with Niolopua and leave my stuff alone. So it, gotta have function. And so that was one of the things that, looking into creating new things like the stool, or the bottle covers or the mini hats. Hawaiians love functionality. Yes, it's about beauty, but the primary thing is that it has to have a function. And and so that was its function for me, was to keep my dog away from the things that I was trying to make for other people in case they had allergies. Parts of the leaf. These are some types of moena. We don't have to really talk about them, but if you're familiar with Samoan mat culture, they always do their big presentations of all the mats. And mats are gifted at weddings and funerals, and they're always kind of brought out and shown. And we had a lot of mats as well. But no one in Hawaii is really making mats anymore. It's really easy to go to Walmart, get the Filipino ones, $20, call it a day. Mats take upwards of 200 leaves to make, and a lot of time, depending on the size. Whereas making a hat, 20 to 30 leaves, your pau. But I actually very much enjoy making mats. It's really fun. I was lucky to inherit a mat from my great grandma that was actually made in Hilo. And it was made, at that time period when you got mats, they were custom made for your house. So it was custom made for her living room, 10 by 14 feet, which is quite a large mat to have. And it's currently in need of repairs. So if you learn how to make mat, come help me fix mine. And then we know that hala was used for this and so many other things: baskets and pillows and hats and fans and placemats and beds. There's a story that I've heard recently that's kind of like the Princess and the Pea, where one of the mats was a little bit funky, and when the girl laid on it, she could tell. And then let's all finish off on a low hala scale. A low and a high, though, because I do believe that even though we have junk stuff like this, hala scale, which causes Lāʻau deformities, which makes the Lāʻau unable to be woven, if we look at the positive side, it's opportunity for people to expand beyond their immediate communities. So I think it was last year, maybe September, I hosted a group from Molokai, and they flew over for 3 days, and they came to weave because they wanted to. And a lot of the Lāʻau on Molokai are affected by hala scale, as well as Maui, and they couldn't find anyone to teach them. And they didn't have access to Lāʻau, so they came here for 3 days, and we just wove. And so looking at the positive side, it's a chance to see how other people do things. From one practitioner to another, one lineage to another, how you get the result might be different, but you get to the same place. And my kumu likes to say, when I'm asking for advice on how do I do this, what if I did it like that? Is that appropriate? Is that correct? Like weaving skill? And she said, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you get the outcome that you want. And so thinking about that when you're trying to create new things, nothing's right or wrong necessarily. It's about getting the outcome that you're looking for. And so with that, hala is definitely living and evolving to fit our needs of the time. So what I don't like to do is only recreate things that I've seen before. I like to try to make new things, because all of those things, when they were created, were products of a need at that time period, right? So hats, you think of hala, and the first thing you think of is papale. Yeah, that's a new invention. We weren't wearing, we modeled those hats after the missionary hats that we saw. And so it was a response to a need. And then we get into more modern time and we start making the modern style fan that we see, a response to a need. And then we see things like hydro flask covers. Yeah. And then we start to see things like purses and we start to see those little covered stools. And so I always think, what is a response to a need now that we can evolve the practice, continue it, um, and it really does not perpetuate that idea of a museum culture. Because if we're only making things that exist in a museum, we might as well live in one. And so, how can we kind of push the boundaries, um, change and evolve? And I think I'm at time. Sorry, guys, I ran over a little bit.
All good. Mahalo nui Kekai. That was amazing. You went into everything that I hope you could about Lohala and the cultivation and care that goes around it. And I loved the positive note that you ended on with Hala scale and how it actually brought you together and brought more connections with Hala with ulana and Lohala. So that's an amazing story to end with. Really appreciate that. So I know that we have a couple questions, and I know Avalon, you probably have to jump off soon for your next meeting. So I just want to get a couple to you before you got to jump off. So I know you answered a question in the Q&A from Kawai Ferry, who was just asking about the highly endangered uhi trees, and if there was any at Palamanui campus. And then Avalon, you had answered that you haven't seen any there yet. I know Waikoloa Dry Forest Reserve, they have some that are growing in their fenced areas. I don't know if they're allowing collections, but if you wanted to see one, they have them growing there. Yeah. And then I had a question. So how did you, Avalon, how did you get into kapa making? Like what drew you to it? Or like was it just a friend connection or yeah, how'd you get started?
When I was an undergraduate at UH Manoa, there was a class being taught by Maile Andrade, which was a fiber arts class, and I wanted to take it just out of curiosity, honestly. I was taking like Mahi Aikalo, and I took 2 semesters of Lāʻau. So just getting into indigenous practices. Also, I'm not Hawaiian at all. Like I grew up here, and so it's one of those things where like my positionality is really important to note. I am very grateful to be part of these practices, but I am not Hawaiian. And so that's something that I always take into account with this work. So I'm not generationally tied to any of this. But in terms of kapa specifically, I'd been wanting to learn about it just because reading about it, doing ethnobotany as an undergraduate, as my minor, meant that I was reading about kapa amongst other, practices that involved plants. And there was just something about it that it's really hard to explain because I don't really know what it was, but just some part of my brain was like, I really would love to learn more about this in particular. And so when I moved back home in 2016, I'd been living on Oahu for 7 years. I knew about Rowan Hufford because she's very famous in the world of kapa, as is her mother, Marie McDonald. And so I just happened to go to the Wili Wili Festival that they have here in Waikoloa every year. And she was set up doing her kapa, and I was like completely starstruck and totally awkward. And I was like, can I try beading? And she's like, yeah, that's the whole point. Like, this is a demo. Come here, try it. And I was like, okay. And then I got her contact information, and yeah, we've been meeting every Monday since the middle of 2017. So it's been almost 8 years now. So I'm very, very fortunate and very, very grateful. And, at this point, I really love teaching folks as well. So I try to do at least 3 or 4 free workshops for the general public every year. So if people are ever interested, again, feel free to reach out. And not sure when my next one is going to be, but hopefully sometime this summer.
And I will put Avalon's website again in our chat. So if anyone wants to get in contact with her, all of her contact information is on there. And yeah, just wanted to mahalo you, Avalon, for jumping on and sharing with us today. I think it's so, even if you're not, kanaka oiwi, it's like so important to still have people of Hawaii here caring and sharing and learning, most importantly, and investigating on their own, how we can learn these practices and then build upon them. Yeah, as we get into the future. So really appreciate that. Okay. And then Kekai, I think So Mason in the chat, he says he met a weaver on Molokai who was able to make great hats, even with the hala scale. The scale insect definitely deforms the leaves, but they die with the leaf and the material dries out. The immature stage can potentially survive inter-island transport, so make sure to freeze leaves. I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Yeah, fortunately, I have no experience or knowledge firsthand with hala scale, thankfully.
Really?
But I do know some weavers that are on Molokai, and it is, hala scale is transferred by the wind. So I think they've been able to find a few groves and areas that are kind of upwind and haven't necessarily been affected yet.
Good point, good point. I also had a question on, so I know you had worked, you mentioned working with other types of lauhala from like Fiji. Like, do you notice like differences in the lauhala itself from different areas, or is it mostly just in the color?
No, yeah, and I'm gonna be real honest.
Yeah.
If it's not Hawaiian hala, don't use it.
Yeah.
No, because the
I
way
get
that
it.
the leaves are processed,
Mm,
um, right, so Samoan Lao, it's so nice because you can buy all these Lao from the Pacific and then you don't have to go pick.
mm,
However, when you get Lao from Samoa, the process in which they prepare their leaves, living in Hilo where it's high humidity, they always mold. So I just made a cute little lay basket 2 months ago and it's molding already. They're also very prone to bugs.
mm.
And I have a thing of mineral oil to oil my stuff down, and it has some essential oils in it. And because they also use sulfur in some of their weaving to make the lao like super like bright white, there can be chemical reactions. And I had a hat turn green once, which was super cool, but not what I wanted. Um, and so definitely, I think the way that the lao are treated, I mean, people have been doing this for thousands of years, so they're all suitable for the climate that they live on. So definitely use Hawaiian Lao. Also, Lao from other places in the Pacific are more susceptible to bugs.
Mm.
That's the worst thing ever is when you open up a bag and the inside is all bug eaten. That is my experience, but it is so convenient to just buy them and then just weave.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a big part of the process I'm seeing, whether you're doing kapa or lauhala or whatever craft you're doing. I mean, the more work you do in the prep, yeah, the easier it is to make the product. So that seems to be a theme. And you also mentioned like the different colors in the different regions. Like, is it produced from just the amount of light that hits it, or like what determines the color? Is it just the variety of the tree, maybe, or the
I
flower?
think it does have a lot to do with the amount of sunlight that we
Mm,
get. And I wish I had a picture of it, but in Hilo, if you look at the Lao, we get this thing that we call banana bread, and it's very speckled, has lots of lines, and it's so textury in color. But I think it really does come down to the amount of light that and the heat that is surrounding that particular tree when it is drying out. Because it's always the dry sides, the west sides, that have the white ones. Not to say that, I mean, I used to pick from this tree in Ko'ohau on Oahu before, and it had the most beautiful white leaves, but it's because it was right on the beach.
mm. Right. And I guess like for beginner weavers, like, do you have any recommendations for like a first project they could try to just get into weaving?
Ooh, for a first project, I mean, people usually start with bracelets.
Bracelet.
I absolutely loathe making bracelets. That is not something that I am interested in whatsoever. The very first thing that I made was a Lauhala star Christmas tree ornament. And that's something that I do in my classes. When I teach my plant classes, I have them do star ornaments. But really, I would just say, and how I first learned it, because my mom was like, I don't want you wasting Lao, was she made me cut up paper strips and weave with old newspaper and stuff like that.
Wow.
And then once I like got good at that, then she's like, "Hey, now you can go use the Lao," because she was very concerned that I would just go take all the Lao and not know what to do with them. So definitely, there's a lot of books on weaving. There's a lot of things that you can find online. Just try. use anything. I have plans to start weaving with plastic, recycled plastic pretty soon. It's just kind of a fun way to, it's already there, might as well use it for something else. Add to its shelf life a little bit longer rather than it going in the landfill.
Yeah, great idea. Yep. Just using more of what we have plenty of these days. And the Kawai Fairy had just dropped a question. She's intrigued with your comment, Kekai, about your Guam friend. I'm wondering if the softness you mentioned of the Hinano and or the royalty preference may be the reason of their strictness.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. He just kind of
Mm.
made a comment one time, like, oh, we only use male trees. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Never asked anything further.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I do know that because they'll find the male tree, they'll cut a branch, bring it to their house, and then try to regrow it that way. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it was probably on a conversation about like plant disease, because he was like, yeah, if we got hollow scale or something that, essentially their trees are all genetically the same because they're cuttings, that it would be quite bad. And that he was just like, yeah, we use male trees. And I just never asked. I was like, oh, cool. Okay.
It's one of those things. Let's see. All right, Avalon, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Hope we get to
Yeah.
cross paths again.
For sure. Mahalo, everybody.
Gotcha. All right. I think that, oh wait, I have one last question. This is
Yeah.
like my own personal question. Do you have any mana'o on like the thornless or the thorn varieties on using thorn versus non-thorny
Mm.
leaves?
You know, Okay, there are differences. And the thornless varieties are not from here. Especially if you see the variegated thornless ones. I've always heard that those are Tahitian Lao. I think they're all great. Um, I use whatever get, but the thorned varieties are definitely stronger. They will last
Okay.
a lot longer.
Mhm.
I've used different types of thornless varieties of hala before, and they just don't last. They're not as
Okay.
sturdy. Um, and so I really think it is just, I mean, Hawaiians hit the nail on the head when they were like, this tree and this is the process. And the process was created in the environment that it was made to live in. So definitely use the thorned ones. It's a little bit junk because you'll get thorns all in your body. And I'm so used to it that, weeks later after cleaning, I'm like, oh, I have a thorn in my leg still.
Yeah.
Um, it's just the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into the process.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mahalo Nui for sharing so much about that process and the hala tree and everything that goes into weaving. We really appreciate you sharing here. Um, and with that, I think that's all the questions I have, and all the questions I think I see from our chat and everything. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and end it. I do have a little short quiz if people, not quiz, sorry, this isn't a test. This is just a little two question survey. So we just keep improving every year. But I will just let that run and then I will probably end in a minute or so, but feel free to jump off whenever you'd like. Mahalo, everyone.
Okay, mahalo.
Thank you, Kekai.